Welcome to Threads of Kindness, where bad bosses meet their match. Today, we uncover stories of hardworking employees fighting back against toxic leadership and unfair treatment. From legal showdowns to moral victories, these tales highlight the strength of standing up for what's right. Brace yourself for twists, turns, and deeply satisfying endings. The company was once a beacon of excellence, thriving under the leadership of its original owner. Over the years, it had grown from a small operation to a well-respected business known for its high-quality products and exceptional customer service. Employees were dedicated, well-compensated, and proud of their work. Among them was a longtime employee who had been with the company for 14 years. He was a master at his craft, loved by customers for his professionalism and expertise, and a mentor to new staff. It was a place where hard work was rewarded and loyalty was reciprocated. Everything changed when the original owner decided to sell the company. While the decision was understandable, he wanted to retire. The transition was far from smooth. The new owner, a woman with little experience in the industry but a lot of confidence in her ability to run a business, took over. From the outset, her approach was unsettling. She portrayed herself as a visionary leader, but her decisions betrayed a troubling mix of arrogance and ignorance. The first red flags appeared during her introductory meetings with staff. She made sweeping declarations about increasing profits while cutting costs, leaving many employees uneasy. She openly criticized some of the company's long-standing practices, labeling them inefficient and outdated. Her plan to trim the budget began with reducing wages and letting go of experienced employees. Those who had spent years building the company's reputation suddenly found themselves replaced by less experienced, lower-paid workers. The employee at the center of this story initially hoped that the changes would be manageable. He believed his years of service, stellar performance, and deep understanding of the company's operations would shield him from the turmoil. However, he quickly realized he was wrong. The new owner seemed particularly intent on cutting costs in ways that undermined the company's core strengths. Quality standards dropped as cheaper materials were used. Long-standing customers, accustomed to excellence, began voicing complaints. Repeat business dwindled, and new customers rarely returned after experiencing the diminished service. Despite the chaos, the employee continued to excel in his role. He maintained strong relationships with customers and stepped up to train new hires, many of whom were unprepared for the demands of the job. His professionalism and dedication stood in stark contrast to the new owner's erratic leadership. But instead of appreciating his contributions, she saw him as an obstacle, a costly relic of the old regime. The tension reached a breaking point when the owner called him into her office. She accused him of being resistant to change and not doing enough to support the company's new direction. The accusations were baseless. He had gone above and beyond to adapt to the changes, even when they conflicted with his own standards of excellence. But it was clear her real goal was to push him out. She ended the meeting with an ominous warning. His role was under review, and further actions would depend on his cooperation. Over the next few weeks, the atmosphere in the office grew increasingly hostile. The employee began noticing subtle but deliberate attempts to undermine him. Tasks he had performed flawlessly for years were suddenly scrutinized. Minor mistakes, some of which were fabricated, were blown out of proportion. It became evident that the owner was building a case against him, likely to justify firing him without providing the legally required notice or severance. Then came the bombshell. He was summoned to a disciplinary meeting. The charges against him were absurd, ranging from vague claims of unprofessional behavior to outright lies about violating health and safety regulations. The meeting was scheduled for 2 days later, giving him little time to prepare. He knew this was a calculated move designed to intimidate him into submission. But the employee was not one to back down. Years of experience had taught him the importance of standing up for what was right. He meticulously reviewed his contract and employment laws, gathering evidence to counter the accusations. His preparations included detailed records of his work, glowing customer reviews, and even training materials that demonstrated his adherence to company policies. By the time the meeting arrived, he was ready to face whatever the owner had planned. The disciplinary meeting would prove to be a pivotal moment, setting the stage for a battle of wits and determination. But for now, the employee focused on the task at hand, defending his integrity and ensuring that the new owner's attempt to tarnish his reputation would not succeed. Little did she know, her underestimation of him would soon lead to her downfall. The disciplinary meeting began in a small, nondescript conference room. The new owner sat at the head of the table, flanked by her witness, a friend she'd recently hired for an office role. The employee entered calmly, carrying a neatly organized binder filled with documents, and took a seat opposite them. Although he appeared composed, he was acutely aware of the stakes. This was not just a fight for his job. It was a battle for his dignity and professional reputation. The owner began with a rehearsed speech about her commitment to maintaining high standards and how she couldn't tolerate disruptive employees. She then listed the accusations against him, each more outlandish than the last. These included minor complaints about tardiness, vague references to insubordination, and the most serious charge, gross misconduct for allegedly violating health and safety laws while delivering a product to a customer. The employee listened patiently, taking notes as she spoke. When she finished, she leaned back with a smug expression, as if expecting him to capitulate immediately. Instead, he calmly addressed each point, dismantling her arguments with precision. First, he tackled the accusations of tardiness and unprofessional behavior. He produced his attendance records, which showed no significant issues, and highlighted emails praising his punctuality and dedication. Next, he addressed the claim of gross misconduct. He pointed out that the delivery method in question was something he had been trained to do years ago and had used successfully countless times. He added that the owner herself had observed him using this method without issue and had even instructed him to train other employees in the same procedure. "I find it interesting," he said, maintaining a steady tone, "that this supposed violation is only being brought up now, after 14 years of impeccable service. Could it be that this is not about safety at all, but rather an attempt to justify pushing me out?" The owner's friend shifted uncomfortably in her chair, but the owner's smug demeanor faltered only slightly. She countered by accusing him of resisting changes in company policy. He responded by detailing the many ways he had adapted to the new regime, including training inexperienced staff and maintaining excellent relationships with customers despite the decline in product quality. As the meeting progressed, it became clear that the owner had underestimated him. She hadn't expected him to come prepared with such thorough evidence, nor had she anticipated his calm, methodical approach. Her frustration began to show. She interrupted him frequently, raising her voice and making increasingly vague accusations. Meanwhile, the employee remained unshaken, steadily countering her points and refusing to be provoked. The tension reached its peak when the owner presented him with an ultimatum. He could either sign a 0-hours contract at minimum wage or be terminated immediately. She tried to sweeten the deal by claiming it would give him flexibility and a chance to prove himself. The employee paused, letting the silence hang in the air before responding. "You're asking me to accept a demotion and a pay cut under false pretenses. That's not only insulting, but also illegal. As per my contract and employment law, I'm entitled to 12 weeks' notice if you wish to terminate my employment. Unless you can provide evidence to support your accusations, you have no grounds to fire me for misconduct." The owner's face flushed red. She excused herself, claiming she needed a brief break to consult with legal counsel. When she returned, her tone had shifted. She announced that she would indeed honor the 12-week notice period, but insisted it was an act of generosity, not an admission of fault. The employee smirked internally. He knew she was cornered. By acknowledging the notice period, she had essentially conceded that her accusations of gross misconduct were baseless. He agreed to the terms, but not before clarifying one last point. "During these 12 weeks, I will fulfill the exact duties outlined in my contract. Nothing more, nothing less. Any additional work will require separate negotiation, as stipulated in the agreement." The owner, clearly irritated, agreed through gritted teeth. She ended the meeting abruptly, dismissing him with a curt, "You can go now." As he walked out of the conference room, he felt a surge of satisfaction. He had stood his ground, protected his rights, and exposed the owner's underhanded tactics. But the battle was far from over. The next 12 weeks would test his resolve even further, as he navigated a workplace poisoned by resentment and prepared for the legal action that would ultimately bring justice. For now, though, he allowed himself a small victory. The owner's plan to strong-arm him into submission had backfired spectacularly, and the fallout was only just beginning. The 12-week notice period began, but the atmosphere in the office was tense and awkward. The owner, still nursing her bruised ego, avoided speaking directly to the employee. Instead, she sent instructions through intermediaries or cryptic emails, often laced with passive-aggressive undertones. She made it clear to the remaining staff that the employee was not to be celebrated or even acknowledged for his years of service. Despite the tension, the employee carried out his duties with the same professionalism and dedication that had defined his career. He trained his replacement, ensured that customer needs were met, and even helped the struggling new hires understand the complexities of the business. His calm demeanor and willingness to assist earned him quiet respect from his colleagues, who were growing increasingly disillusioned with the owner's leadership. The owner, however, could not let things go. In a petty move, she organized a spa day for the entire office, except for the employee. She instructed him to cover the phones during the outing, claiming that his role required operational support. While others enjoyed a day of relaxation, he stayed behind, managing calls and completing tasks. The exclusion did not bother him much. He had no interest in the spa, but it served as further evidence of her vindictive nature. As his final day approached, the employee ensured that every handover document was in order. His replacement, a close friend, was well-trained and ready to step into the role. On the last day, the owner barely acknowledged his departure. There were no thank you notes, no farewell speeches, not even a card. It was as if she hoped to erase his contributions from the company's history. But the employee had one final move. After his last day, the owner received a letter from his attorney, formally notifying her of a lawsuit for unfair dismissal. The timing was deliberate. It ensured the company could not retaliate or concoct additional claims against him. The owner was reportedly livid when she read the letter, storming out of the office to call her lawyer. The lawsuit exposed her actions in detail. The fabricated accusations of misconduct, the coerced contract offer, and the toxic work environment all became part of the record. The employee's lawyer presented a wealth of evidence, including a recording of the disciplinary meeting that captured the owner's attempts to manipulate the situation. With no credible defense, the owner's legal team advised her to settle out of court. The settlement was substantial, covering lost wages, damages for emotional distress, and legal fees. The employee walked away with a sense of justice and the satisfaction of knowing he had held the owner accountable for her behavior. In the months that followed, the fallout from the owner's actions continued to unravel. Several long-standing customers reached out to the employee, curious about his sudden departure. When he explained the situation, many decided to sever ties with the company, citing concerns about its declining quality and unethical practices. Some even offered him jobs, though he ultimately chose a different path. The company, once a thriving business, struggled to stay afloat. The owner's cost-cutting measures, combined with her poor treatment of employees and customers, had eroded its foundation. Reviews plummeted, staff turnover soared, and the few remaining loyal clients abandoned ship. Within a year, the business was barely operational, and rumors of bankruptcy circulated. As for the employee, he found a new job in a different industry, one that valued his expertise and treated him with respect. His new position offered better pay, reasonable hours, and a supportive work environment. The ordeal with his former employer had been a grueling chapter in his life, but it had also reinforced his resilience and commitment to standing up for himself. Looking back, he felt no lingering bitterness, only relief. The Karen-like owner had tried to undermine him, but in doing so, she had orchestrated her own downfall. The experience was a reminder of the importance of knowing one's rights, staying professional under pressure, and never compromising one's integrity. Karen's arrival as the new owner of the company was anything but inspiring. She entered with grand promises of streamlining operations, improving profits, and taking the business to the next level. Employees were initially optimistic, hoping that a fresh perspective might bring about positive changes. But within weeks, it became evident that Karen's approach was driven less by innovation and more by ruthless cost-cutting. Her first move was to fire long-time employees, individuals who had spent years mastering their craft and building relationships with customers. She replaced them with less experienced workers who were willing to accept minimum wage. To Karen, this strategy seemed like a no-brainer. Fewer expenses meant higher profits. However, the cracks in her plan appeared almost immediately. The new hires, though eager, lacked the expertise to uphold the company's long-standing reputation for excellence. Mistakes became frequent, deliveries were delayed, and customers began to notice. Longtime clients, who had relied on the company for its superior quality and consistent service, were appalled when their products arrived with visible flaws. Complaints flooded in, but but Karen brushed them off, attributing the dissatisfaction to unrealistic expectations. Her next move was even more short-sighted. Believing that the company could squeeze more money out of its loyal customers, Karen decided to raise prices. What she failed to realize was that many of these customers had stayed loyal because of the balance between quality and cost. With rising prices and declining standards, they began to explore alternatives. One by one, the company's core clientele started leaving, taking their business elsewhere. Among the remaining employees was a seasoned worker who had been with the company for over a decade. Known for his meticulous attention to detail and dedication, he had played a crucial role in building the company's reputation. Customers trusted him implicitly, often requesting his expertise for their projects. Despite the deteriorating conditions under Karen's leadership, he continued to deliver exceptional results, going above and beyond to maintain the company's legacy. His presence provided a semblance of stability amid the chaos, and both his colleagues and clients respected him deeply. However, Karen saw him differently. To her, he was a costly liability. His salary, which reflected years of experience and contributions to the company's growth, was an expense she was eager to eliminate. Karen believed that the company's success was not tied to any single employee, and that even her most skilled worker could be replaced. She began scrutinizing his performance, searching for any excuse to justify her plan. Over time, Karen's antagonism toward the employee became apparent. She frequently called him out during meetings, questioning his methods and decisions, even when they were supported by years of proven success. Rumors began circulating among the staff that Karen was planning to cut his salary or force him out entirely. Despite this, the employee remained professional, focusing on his work and refusing to be drawn into office politics. Karen's frustration grew when she realized that simply firing him would be challenging. His contract included specific protections, requiring a justified reason for termination and a lengthy notice period. To bypass these obstacles, Karen concocted a plan. She would accuse him of gross misconduct, a serious charge that, if proven, would allow her to terminate his employment immediately, without providing notice or severance pay. It was a high-stakes gamble, but Karen was confident that her position as the owner would allow her to control the narrative. The first step in her plan was to call a disciplinary meeting. She handed the employee a formal letter outlining vague allegations of health and safety violations, claiming that his actions had put the company at risk. The accusations were baseless, but Karen hoped they would intimidate him into compliance. She offered him two options: sign a new 0-hours contract at minimum wage or face immediate dismissal. The employee, however, was no ordinary target. He had spent years navigating complex projects and dealing with high-pressure situations, and he wasn't about to be bullied into submission. Recognizing the gravity of the situation, he prepared meticulously for the meeting. He reviewed his contract, consulted employment laws, and even decided to secretly record the proceedings. Armed with knowledge and determination, he walked into the meeting ready to defend himself. Karen, on the other hand, underestimated her opponent. She believed that the employee, like many others, would cave under pressure. Her arrogance blinded her to the possibility that her actions could backfire. As the meeting began, Karen confidently presented her accusations, fully expecting the employee to either grovel for his job or resign quietly. Instead, he calmly dismantled her arguments, pointing out inconsistencies and presenting evidence to counter each claim. The turning point came when the employee highlighted a clause in his contract that guaranteed a 12-week notice period unless there was undeniable proof of gross misconduct. Karen's accusations, built on shaky ground, did not meet this standard. As he quoted the relevant legal codes, Karen's confidence began to waver. Realizing she was out of her depth, she called for a break, retreating to consult her lawyer. The tension in the office was palpable as the meeting dragged on. Karen's desperate attempts to regain control only served to expose her lack of understanding of both the business and the law. Meanwhile, the employee remained composed, refusing to be intimidated. By the time the meeting ended, it was clear that Karen's plan had failed. Forced to honor the terms of his contract, she reluctantly granted the employee his 12-week notice period, effectively extending his tenure, despite her efforts to cut it short. As Karen stormed back to her office, the employee returned to his desk, quietly savoring his small victory. But the battle was far from over. The next 12 weeks would test both their resolve setting the stage for a showdown that would determine the future of the company. For now, though, the employee focused on his work, knowing that his professionalism and dedication were his greatest assets in the face of Karen's relentless schemes. With 12 weeks of employment still secured, the employee returned to his duties with an unshaken resolve. While others in the office whispered about Karen's failed attempt to oust him, he kept his focus on delivering results. He knew his professionalism and strong ties with the company's long-standing customers were his greatest strengths. Karen, however, refused to let go of her grudge. Her resentment toward him simmered just below the surface, manifesting in petty actions that only further alienated her staff. Karen's first move was to isolate him. She instructed other employees to avoid unnecessary interactions with him, warning them not to involve him in tasks outside his official responsibilities. But the remaining team members, already disillusioned by her leadership, quietly ignored her instructions. Many respected the employee for his expertise and willingness to help, and they found themselves secretly seeking his advice whenever issues arose. Karen's attempts to diminish his influence only solidified his role as the unofficial leader in the office. One of Karen's more blatant acts of retaliation came when she organized a team appreciation day, treating everyone in the office to a luxurious spa outing, everyone except him. While the rest of the staff enjoyed a day of pampering, Karen instructed him to cover the phones and handle administrative tasks. It was a transparent effort to humiliate him, but instead of reacting, he approached the situation with calm detachment. He answered calls, completed his work, and even took the opportunity to tidy up his workspace, treating the day as just another part of his professional routine. Word of Karen's exclusionary tactics spread quickly among the employees. Instead of turning them against the employee, it highlighted Karen's pettiness and reinforced their loyalty to him. They began to question her motives more openly, with murmurs of dissatisfaction growing louder. The spa incident, rather than isolating him, became a symbol of Karen's inability to lead effectively. Meanwhile, the employee continued to fulfill his obligations with the same level of excellence that had defined his career. He trained new hires, ensured smooth product deliveries, and maintained open communication with the company's remaining customers. Several longtime clients, noticing the changes under Karen's leadership, began voicing their concerns directly to him. They trusted his judgment and sought his reassurance, often expressing frustration over the declining quality of service. One of the company's largest clients, who had worked with the employee for years, requested a high-priority project during this period. Knowing the complexity of the task, they insisted that he personally oversee it. Karen, aware of the significance of this client, reluctantly agreed, but made it clear that she expected perfection. The employee, as always, delivered. The project was completed on time and exceeded the client's expectations, earning glowing feedback. Despite the success, Karen remained ungrateful. She criticized him in private meetings, accusing him of being overly independent and resistant to her authority. Her paranoia led her to micromanage even the smallest details of his work, often undermining his efforts with last-minute changes. The employee, however, refused to be provoked. He documented every interaction, building a detailed record of her actions as a safeguard against further attempts to discredit him. Karen's fixation on cutting costs and maximizing profits continued to backfire. As more experienced staff left the company, replacements struggled to keep up with the demands of the job. Mistakes became routine, leading to delays and frustrated clients. The employee found himself stepping in frequently to mitigate these issues, using his expertise to salvage relationships and maintain a semblance of stability. But even his efforts couldn't stop the exodus of longtime customers, who began severing ties with the company. By the 8th week of his notice period, the cracks in Karen's leadership were undeniable. The office atmosphere had grown tense, with employees walking on eggshells to avoid her wrath. Morale was at an all-time low, and rumors of further layoffs circulated. Karen, oblivious to the impact of her decisions, continued to focus on short-term gains, ignoring the long-term damage she was inflicting on the company. In stark contrast, the employee's reputation among customers and colleagues only grew stronger. Several clients, disheartened by the company's decline, approached him privately to express their support. Some even hinted at opportunities elsewhere, offering him positions in their own organizations should he choose to leave. While he appreciated their offers, he remained committed to seeing out his notice period with integrity. Karen, sensing the growing divide between herself and the rest of the team, attempted to reassert control through stricter policies and harsher reprimands. but her efforts only deepened the resentment. Employees who once took pride in their work now viewed their jobs as temporary stepping stones, biding their time until better opportunities arose. The employee's decision to leave became a rallying point, symbolizing the growing discontent within the company. As the end of his notice period approached, the employee began preparing for his departure. He ensured that his responsibilities were thoroughly documented, training his replacement to the best of his ability. Despite Karen's attempts to undermine him, he remained professional, focusing on leaving the company in a better state than he had found it. Karen's final attempt to salvage the situation came in the form of a desperate plea. In a rare moment of candor, she acknowledged the challenges the company faced and asked him to reconsider his decision. But her words rang hollow, coming too late to undo the damage she had caused. The employee politely declined, citing his commitment to maintaining his professional integrity. The stage was now set for a dramatic conclusion. As his final day loomed, Karen's frustration reached a boiling point. She knew that his departure would leave a void that no amount of cost-cutting could fill. But rather than admit her mistakes, she doubled down on her belief that the company could thrive without him. Unbeknownst to her, the employee had one final move to make, one that would expose the full extent of her mismanagement and set the stage for her eventual downfall. As the employee's final day arrived, the office buzzed with a mix of anticipation and apprehension. Karen had planned no farewell, no acknowledgement of his contributions. The absence of even a token gesture didn't surprise him. He knew better than to expect gratitude from her. Instead, his colleagues quietly expressed their appreciation throughout the day, offering kind words and small tokens of their respect. It was clear to everyone but Karen just how much he had meant to the company. Karen spent most of the day holed up in her office, avoiding interactions. Whether it was her pride, anger, or simply her unwillingness to face the consequences of her actions, her absence spoke volumes. The employee, ever professional, completed his remaining tasks and handed over his responsibilities meticulously. As the clock struck 5 p.m., he gathered his belongings, exchanged farewells with his colleagues, and walked out of the office with his head held high. What Karen didn't know was that the employee had already set his next move into motion. With the help of a skilled employment lawyer, he had filed a claim for unfair dismissal, citing the fabricated accusations of gross misconduct, as well as the coercive attempt to force him into a lower-paying contract. The claim included a detailed transcript of their meetings, a recording of her statements, and a comprehensive account of her actions. The evidence was irrefutable. The legal notice arrived on Karen's desk the day after his departure. According to the office assistant who later relayed the story, Karen's face turned pale as she read through the document. Her initial reaction was denial. She called her lawyer, insisting that the employee had no case. But as the lawyer reviewed the evidence, it became clear that Karen's position was untenable. The recording of the meeting alone was damning, exposing her lies and her blatant attempt to manipulate the situation to her advantage. While Karen's legal troubles began to unfold, the fallout from the employee's departure became increasingly evident. Several major clients, who had long relied on his expertise, severed ties with the company. They cited declining quality and poor communication as their reasons, but everyone knew the real issue: Karen's leadership. Word of her behavior spread quickly through professional circles, damaging the company's reputation and discouraging potential new business. The loss of clients wasn't Karen's only problem. Her remaining staff, disheartened by her treatment of their colleague and the overall toxic environment, began leaving in droves. The office assistant, who had been a steadfast presence, resigned just weeks after the employee's departure. She couldn't tolerate Karen's behavior any longer and found a position with a more reputable company. The only people left were inexperienced hires who lacked the skills and motivation to keep the business afloat. Karen's desperation became more apparent with each passing week. She attempted to lure clients back with discounts and promises of improved service, but her efforts were too little, too late. Many of the clients had already reached out to the former employee, offering him positions or consulting opportunities. While he graciously declined some, he accepted others that aligned with his goals, quickly establishing himself as a sought-after expert in his field. The company's decline accelerated as Karen's financial mismanagement caught up with her. The decision to increase prices while cutting quality had alienated her customer base, and the resulting drop in revenue left her scrambling to cover expenses. In a misguided attempt to save money, she canceled several client orders without offering refunds, citing an act of God clause in the contracts. This blatant disregard for her customers' trust led to a flood of negative reviews online, further tarnishing the company's image. Meanwhile, the employee's legal case moved forward. Karen attempted to delay the proceedings, likely hoping that the mounting costs would force him to drop the claim, but her plan backfired. His lawyer, working on a no-win, no-fee basis, pressed on with unwavering determination. Karen, on the other hand, had to pay her legal team out of pocket, a drain on her already limited resources. As the case unfolded, more details about Karen's actions came to light. Former employees and clients provided statements supporting the employee's claims, painting a damning picture of her leadership. The evidence of her attempt to falsify the redundancy notice and the coercive nature of her contract negotiations left little room for doubt. Realizing the futility of her position, Karen eventually agreed to settle out of court. The settlement was a significant victory for the employee. It provided financial compensation for the wrongful dismissal and served as a vindication of his professionalism and integrity. But for him, the real triumph was knowing that he had stood up for himself and refused to let Karen's behavior go unchallenged. Karen's troubles didn't end with the settlement. The negative press surrounding the case further eroded her credibility, and the remaining clients abandoned the company in quick succession. Her attempts to rebuild the business were hampered by her inability to attract skilled employees or new customers. Within a year, the once thriving company was on the brink of bankruptcy. For the former employee, life after Karen was a stark contrast. He accepted a position with a reputable firm in a related industry, where his skills and experience were highly valued. The new role offered better pay, more reasonable hours, and a supportive work environment. Free from the toxic influence of his former boss, he thrived professionally and personally. The story of Karen's downfall became a cautionary tale in the industry, a reminder of the consequences of greed and mismanagement. Her refusal to value her employees and her short-sighted pursuit of profit had cost her everything. Meanwhile, the employee's success highlighted the importance of standing up for one's rights and maintaining integrity in the face of adversity. In the end, Karen's attempts to cut corners and undermine her most valuable asset had backfired spectacularly. The company she had purchased with the hope of maximizing profits was now a shell of its former self, a testament to the damage caused by poor leadership. And as she struggled to salvage what little remained, the employee who had once carried the business on his shoulders was thriving, proving that resilience and professionalism always win in the long run. In early 2013, the bustling office of an Australian company was abuzz with whispers and uncertainties. Rumors about the company's future had circulated for weeks, fueled by the abrupt downturn in its operations and the increasing presence of upper management from the parent organization. Employees speculated about layoffs, restructuring, and relocations, but the confirmation of the company's impending closure arrived during an all-hands meeting in January. The news was official. Operations would cease by June 30, 2013. The announcement hit like a thunderclap. The management assured the gathered employees that the closure would be handled with fairness and transparency. Everyone would receive their redundancy notices in due time, along with the appropriate payouts as stipulated under Australian labor laws. While the tone of the announcement was somber, the employee, let's call him James, couldn't help but notice a strange undertone. There was an unspoken air of calculation, a feeling that not everything was as straightforward as it seemed. James had worked for the company since early 2011. Over the course of 2 years, he had established himself as a diligent, reliable team member. He had been thrown into the deep end from the start, tasked with complex projects and tight deadlines, but his performance had exceeded expectations. As the company grew, James had become a cornerstone of its operations. By 2013, he was one of the most experienced employees remaining, and his contribution to the business's success was undeniable. But James also knew the corporate world could be ruthless. He was aware of the financial strain the company faced and understood the lengths to which management might go to save costs during its final months. This knowledge planted a seed of suspicion in his mind, one that only grew as the redundancy letters began arriving in early June. One by one, his colleagues packed up their desks, some leaving the industry altogether, others moving on to new opportunities. James, however, received no letter. At first, he thought it might be an oversight. Perhaps the HR department had simply missed him in the shuffle. But as the days passed and more people departed, he realized it was intentional. The lack of notice wasn't a mistake, it was a calculated move. Management's strategy was transparent to James. They hoped he would resign on his own. By doing so, he would forfeit the redundancy payout to which he was entitled. This would save the company a significant sum, but it was a gamble. If James refused to resign, They would have to deal with the legal implications of failing to issue a redundancy notice on time. Rather than confronting management immediately, James decided to wait. He continued showing up to work each day, fulfilling his duties with quiet determination. While his colleagues whispered words of encouragement and shared their plans for life after the company, James kept his thoughts to himself. He knew that any sign of frustration or anger could be used against him. Instead, he remained calm, biding his time and observing the situation unfold. As the office grew emptier, the atmosphere became increasingly surreal. Desks sat abandoned, phones rang unanswered, and the hum of productivity that once defined the space was replaced by a deafening silence. James watched as the remaining members of the management team, particularly the COO, struggled to maintain a semblance of control. The COO, brought in specifically to oversee the closure, seemed overwhelmed by the logistical nightmare of winding down operations. This only strengthened James's resolve. The tipping point came during a casual conversation with the COO in late June. Stopping by James's desk, the executive remarked, "You must be sad that tomorrow is the last day." James raised an eyebrow. "Is it?" he asked, feigning surprise. "I didn't realize it was my last day. I haven't received a redundancy notice." The COO froze, the confident demeanor replaced by a flicker of panic. "You haven't received a notice?" he stammered. "That can't be right." "I'm pretty sure it is," James replied calmly. "I haven't signed anything, and I haven't been informed otherwise." What followed was a series of hurried discussions behind closed doors. The COO and the remaining members of management scrambled to address the oversight, or rather, the deliberate omission. It was clear to James that they had hoped to avoid this confrontation altogether. Now, they were caught in a bind. They couldn't afford to admit fault, but they also couldn't risk escalating the situation further. For James, this was the opportunity he had been waiting for. As he watched the COO's hurried retreat, James felt a surge of quiet satisfaction. The game was on, and he intended to play it to the very end. Over the next 24 hours, he would see just how far management was willing to go, and how much their miscalculation would cost them. The following morning, James arrived at the office as usual, a cup of coffee in hand, and a calm expression on his face. Despite the chaos brewing in the background, he appeared unfazed. The COO, on the other hand, looked frazzled as he motioned for James to meet him in his office. Inside, the CFO was already seated, a stack of papers resting on the desk between them. "James, we've realized there was a mistake," the COO began, his tone forced and hurried. "Here's your redundancy notice." James picked up the letter and scanned its contents. The first thing that caught his attention was the date. It was backdated by nearly a month. He set the letter down and looked the COO squarely in the eye. "This isn't today's date." The COO flushed. "Well, the notice was technically issued then," he said, stumbling over his words. "We just didn't get it to you on time." James leaned back in his chair, his demeanor calm but firm. "If the notice wasn't issued to me, it wasn't issued at all. This is the first I'm seeing of it, and as you can tell, it hasn't been signed by me." The CFO, who had remained silent until now, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The COO pressed on. "But you've known about the closure for months. Surely you understand this was just a procedural oversight." James shook his head. "What I understand is that redundancy notices must follow specific legal requirements, including accurate dates. If this was issued when you say it was, why wasn't I informed earlier, and why wasn't it signed?" The COO sighed, clearly agitated. "What do you want us to do, James?" James's response was measured and direct. "You can issue me a notice with today's date, and I'll consider signing it." Reluctantly, the COO retreated to his desk and printed a new letter with the correct date. He slid it across the desk toward James, a tight smile plastered on his face. "There you go, everything's in order now." But James wasn't finished. He picked up the new letter and reviewed it carefully. "There's still one issue," he said, setting the paper back down. "With this date, I'm entitled to an additional day of annual leave in my final payout. You'll need to adjust the figures accordingly." The CFO stifled a laugh as the COO's face turned crimson. "Fine," the COO snapped, scribbling notes on the payout schedule. He handed the revised document to James. "Is that better?" James examined the updated schedule, taking his time to ensure every detail was accurate. Finally, he nodded and signed both documents. "Thank you," he said, his tone polite but firm. "I'll be packing up my desk now." The The COO, eager to regain control of the situation, attempted to assign James a new task. "Since you're still technically employed for the next 28 days, we'd appreciate it if you could help out with packing up the office." James raised an eyebrow. "My contract specifies my responsibilities as being tied to specific projects. Since those projects are no longer part of this company, I have no further obligations. I'll be using my remaining time as I see fit." The CFO couldn't suppress his laughter this time, while the COO fumed silently. "You're telling me we're paying you to do nothing for the next month?" the COO asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "That's correct," James replied with a smile, "unless you'd prefer to terminate my employment early, which would come with additional compensation for breach of contract." The COO had no choice but to let James go about his day. Over the next few hours, James packed up his desk, chatted with remaining colleagues, and tied up loose ends. By mid-afternoon, he was sitting at his desk, sipping coffee and casually browsing job postings online. The silence in the nearly deserted office was broken only by the occasional frustrated mutter from the COO's office. As the day drew to a close, the CFO approached James with an unexpected offer. "You don't have to stay until 5 p.m., he said, a wry grin on his face. "Feel free to leave whenever you're ready." James stood, gathering his belongings. "Thank you. It's been a pleasure working with you," he said, extending a hand. The CFO shook it firmly, clearly impressed by James's composure and resourcefulness. As James walked out of the office for the last time, he couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. Management's attempt to manipulate him had backfired spectacularly, and their incompetence had cost them far more than they'd anticipated. But for James, the victory wasn't just about the payout, it was about standing up for himself and refusing to be undervalued. The battle wasn't over yet, though. In the coming weeks, James would take his fight to the next level, ensuring that the company's attempts to exploit its employees would not go unchallenged. The day after James officially left the company, he set his next plan into motion. Equipped with all the evidence he had meticulously gathered, including recordings of the disciplinary meetings, email exchanges, and copies of legal documents, James contacted a lawyer who specialized in employment law. Their initial consultation was promising. His lawyer, a sharp and seasoned professional, immediately identified multiple violations of labor laws, including the company's attempt to backdate the redundancy notice and their fabricated accusations of misconduct. "This is a strong case," the lawyer assured James. "They've mishandled the redundancy process, and their actions border on wrongful dismissal. If we proceed, I'm confident we'll secure a favorable outcome." James agreed to move forward. The lawyer filed a formal claim for unfair dismissal, including all supporting documentation. The company's legal team was promptly notified, and the COO and CFO received the news that James wasn't letting the matter rest. Initially, the company attempted to dismiss the claim outright. They argued that James had been offered a redundancy package and that his refusal to sign the original notice was unreasonable. However, James's lawyer countered their arguments with the recordings of the meetings, highlighting how management had attempted to coerce him into signing a falsified document. This evidence, combined with their inability to prove any legitimate basis for their accusations of misconduct, put the company on the defensive. The COO, who had been confident in his ability to strong-arm James, began to crumble under the pressure. Internal emails revealed that the decision to exclude James from the redundancy notice list was deliberate, aimed at saving money. These emails became a crucial piece of evidence, exposing the company's intention to circumvent legal obligations. As the case gained momentum, the company's reputation took a significant hit. News of the legal battle spread among former employees, many of whom had also experienced unfair treatment during the closure process. Several came forward with their own stories, providing additional insight into the company's mismanagement and mistreatment of staff. Customers, too, began to notice the company's decline. With the majority of experienced employees gone, the quality of their products and services had plummeted. Long-standing clients withdrew their contracts, unwilling to continue working with a company that had lost its reliability and professionalism. Meanwhile, James focused on his future. While the legal proceedings were underway, he networked with industry contacts, many of whom were eager to offer him opportunities. His reputation as a skilled and dedicated professional preceded him, and he received multiple job offers. Ultimately, he accepted a position with a company that valued his expertise and provided a supportive work environment. After months of legal wrangling, the company's lawyers proposed a settlement. They hoped to avoid the costs and public scrutiny of a full trial. James and his lawyer reviewed the offer carefully, ensuring that it met his expectations. In addition to a financial payout that far exceeded his original redundancy package, the settlement included a clause requiring the company to cover all legal fees and issue a formal apology for their actions. James agreed to the terms, but not without a sense of bittersweet satisfaction. While the victory was well-deserved, it served as a reminder of the company's once thriving potential, squandered by poor leadership and greed. The settlement marked the beginning of the end for the company. With its finances already strained by poor management decisions, the payout to James further depleted its resources. Key clients continued to leave, and the remaining employees, disillusioned by the leadership's incompetence, sought opportunities elsewhere. Within a year, the company declared bankruptcy. Its assets were sold off, and the COO and CFO quietly faded into obscurity. For James, the experience became a valuable lesson in standing up for his rights and the importance of knowing his worth. He thrived in his new role, earning respect and recognition from his peers. Reflecting on the ordeal, James often said, "It wasn't just about the money. It was about sending a message. No one should be taken advantage of, no matter how big or powerful the company thinks it is." And with that, James turned the page, leaving behind the chaos of the past and embracing a future defined by integrity and success. Thanks for watching Threads of Kindness. Today's stories showed the power of wit, persistence, and self-respect. If you've ever faced a tough situation at work, remember, you're stronger than you think. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more tales of triumph. See you soon for another dose of justice.